Okay, hello fellow preppers. Remember the wheel bearing that was failing? Well, yeah, taking it to the workshop, and this is what we're going to do today. Wheel bearing and drive shaft, yeah, but it means taking the hub assembly off the vehicle first of all, which means a little bit of stripping, actually quite a lot of stripping. Caliper, get it out of the way, hang it up with a cable tie on the spring, that just gets it out of the way. You don't really want to put tension or too much tension on the flexi hose because that could damage it, yeah? So yes, workshop is the way to go with this sort of thing. It's not a roadside repair, okay, so I'll just make you aware of that. Got some bolts to undo. The first tip I'm going to show you here, which is what I do every single day, I always have a wire brush with me and some WD-40, is to clean the threads as much as possible. Sometimes you can use a bit of flame to crack off the crispy bits of rust, or if it's not too heavily rusted, you can use WD-40 on the bolts or the threads that are sticking out of the nuts, so they don't gum up when you wind them off, either with a power tool or a ratchet or whatever you need to. One of the most important ones is the steering ball joint threads here, because unless you're prepared to change it and it's in good condition, you have to make sure it can be wound back on again easily, yeah, and these are not usually a standard threaded nut. I'll just warn you of that because we've been caught out by this before. It's a fine thread, yeah. So this, do you know how to do a ball joint? If you don't, I will show you at some point, but we're just going to cut corners here and just say, yeah, we're stripping it. Did show you these ratchet spanners in the last video, yeah, and these are a lifesaver, to be honest with you. They work really well and you can work with them at a distance. So yeah, the brake disc is either held on with some type of retaining screw, or one or two, or none. It depends what system it is on a vehicle, but this is a Citroen. These are done with small grub screws, using a T15 socket to undo them, and they can be a real pain. They can just strip the inside of the screw where you can't get them undone, like this one, okay? So not a biggie. Now there's a couple of ways you can approach this. If it's a little bit too tight and it's corroded in, then you might need to drill it out, or if it's not too bad, then you can use a chisel and tap it at an angle to get it to move. And unfortunately this one, it just wouldn't work for me, so we had to resort to something else, so I'll show you that. Yeah, it's quite soft metal actually, which is good. These are soft metal screws, so you can see the damage that's been caused there. That's now irreversible for that screw. That can't be used again, which is not a biggie because that just retains it in place while you put the wheel back on. Yeah. So here's a left-handed drill piece, which sometimes works if you drill out a bolt. You can sometimes wind it out as it catches, but not in this case. This is scuppered, yeah. So I have a taper, because it's a countersunk screw. I have a taper here which is giving me leeway on the drill bit, so I'm using a large drill bit to work it not the way down to the disc, just taking the head off, and it also gives me a center to use a normal drill. Now I know left-handed ones won't work, and I'll drill out the center as a pilot hole. This goes all the way through the hub anyway, or the disc carrier, yeah. And what we'll do here is we'll drill through to pilot it and then use a larger drill. It's just one of these things you do, and you do need a good drill set with this type of job. So to cut a long story short, because it actually takes a while to drill out, using a drill which is actually the right size for the bolt thread, and what I'm really doing is just removing the head of the set screw, not bolt, it's a set screw. And then once that's done, that should free up the disc so it will come off without any more hassle. I'm going to leave the bolt in there, there's no point. If I had time, yeah, I'd probably tap that out and re-drill it, but it's yeah, and that's not going to happen today, okay? So there you go, that's smooth enough as it is, that's clean without any damage to the disc, which is the most important thing. So next thing to do really is to get the hub carrier off. So basically on this vehicle it has a pinch bolt which retains it to the bottom ball joint, a pinch bolt as well which holds the top carrier to the shock absorber, and a few other bits and pieces which you've seen already. So sometimes a pry bar works to lift it out of the way, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes you need to slap it with a hammer. And look, I'm using a copper hammer which is non-damaging. Yeah, get into the habit of trying not to damage things rather than smacking them with a steel hammer. So yeah, I can lift that out of the way. This frees the drive shaft to come out, so if you were just wanting to change the drive shaft, that's what you could do. Okay, now this was leaking and so was this side, but it's also knocking because it's worn. Yeah, so you can see all the grease there, it needs changing. Okay, so I can now remove this if I want to, which I'm going to do, being careful of the ABS lead which I disconnected earlier. WD-40 is actually a miracle liquid because it does penetrate, okay, but it just helps to lube. So there we go. This is how this one is removed. Vehicles are different, some have 2 pinch bolts and a clamp, all depends, but you just have to look to see how it's connected to the shock absorber. But usually you can take the carrier off and leave the shock absorber in place and the wishbone in place as well. We have a leak on here. This has been leaking for a while, or should I say weeping. Okay, so this is lubricant loss. Always really should change the seal anyway. But we also have a whole drive shaft, okay, because that has come to the end of its life. Yeah, now this is examples of other ones that are damaged. This one was knocking because the bearing fell to pieces. This is the gearbox side of the drive shaft, and that's as you can see here. Okay, CV joint as well. Actually, these are so hard to remove sometimes. It's better just to replace the whole damn thing. Always replace the seal. And what I'm going to do here as well is put some moly slip in it, yeah, chrome molybdenum sulfate, which helps lubrication actually and wear. So we've got to check this drive shaft out first of all, because it was off eBay for 50 quid, which is not a bad deal at all. The other end is slightly different, but what we need to make sure is the splines fit properly into the gearbox, and it will actually sit in the right place, and the same on the hub driver as well. Okay, so what we have here is the gearbox drive shaft seal. It has a gaiter on it. This is just a band to make sure that it stops the seal from leaking. This is what I removed it with, just like prying it out. It's a pry bar but a seal remover. I've done it so I didn't damage it, just in case. This one is actually worn. This is why it's leaking. There's a little groove in there where the seal's been sitting. So yes, unless you put a new seal in and reposition it, it will leak again or just weep. Yeah. So we have the size and the reference for the seal we're going to fit, and we have the new seal here, and the shaft I'm fitting it to has a little bit of lubricant on it, which stops it from being damaged while I'm testing it out. So that fits okay, and the size, it should be an interference fit into the transmission or the output side. And always use a flat plate which is bigger than the seal, obviously, and it's going to fit flush. And I'm knocking it in the center, but it doesn't always go in the center, and it's such an awkward place. You check it to make sure that it's not sitting proud anywhere, which is sitting just above the edge of the transmission recess there. So just knock that on one edge to get it level. If the seal doesn't go in level, it won't work. Okay, but that's in there, that's done. If you noticed, I actually drained the gearbox before I started this job. I didn't tell you that, but now what we're going to do is put the new drive shaft into place. Yeah, because it's new, and it just makes more sense to get new than it does to repair them. But I will repair the other ones I've got laying on the bench later. So there we go. I'll leave that now, and what I've got to do is change the wheel bearing in the hub. Tapping this does help it to go home. There is loads of different ways these are fixed, but mainly nowadays they just pull out, and you'll find that if you're working on this and you pull the hub out of the way, sometimes it goes pop and the gearbox oil drops out onto the floor. Not in this case. So this is a manual cassette or a car cassette bearing remover replacer tool, okay, which is Blue Spot Tools. I've got a video on that. Shows you how to do wheel bearings, but I'll just give you a little bit of a heads up on this because it's probably quite important so you can see what's involved. socket, impact socket, soft hammer and an extension which will help to knock out the hub. But first of all we got to get the ABS sensor out, and yeah, that's plastic but that was seized in. There is a circlip here. Whichever side the circlip is how the bearing will be pulled out. But first of all we need to whack out the actual hub spigot, okay, which is done, okay. And I've not damaged this because copper hammers do not damage. What you'll also find is part of the bearing race will be stuck to this. This is so common, it's unreal. Yeah, and there is a way of removing that, of course. Now lubrication, a little bit of wire brush, get it in there, and then use a chisel, yeah, to knock round the circlip. This circlip will be spare because you should, in a wheel bearing kit, get the circlip, yeah. So this is just tip of the day, and this comes with most internal circlips. When they're rusted into place, you can usually jar them by tapping them and then using the circlip pliers to remove them, and you do need big circlip pliers for cart wheel bearings, okay. And yeah, this is, I was using this for external bearings, this is a snap-on one, but there are other circlip pliers available for you at less of a cost. But of course I buy my tools, or I used to buy from Snap-on quite exclusively, but they are getting expensive now, so I've actually turned to Blue Spot tools for hand tools, which says something about the way the economy is in at the moment, doesn't it? Yeah, but I don't need to tell you, you're preppers, you know this anyway. So yeah, it can be a little bit awkward because I have damaged the circlip, but it actually won't come out, so I just tap it round again just a little bit just to free it off. Once it's free, it will come out. If you don't do that, it won't come out because it will be seized into place. It's just the way they are. This is always roadside. The moisture, the water, rainwater, puddle water, whatever you like, gets in there, sits in there and causes corrosion. That's just a done thing. But the bearing's sealed, and it has been known for older bearings to actually get water into the bearing and make them fail, okay. So this is another little trick to extend the torque on your spanners. 32mm spanner here, and I've had to add an extension on it because this has been really tight. This bearing was seized in. They are an interference fit. They do take a little bit of effort to remove them. However, there is a tolerance that you get to where the tool won't move, and instead of damaging the tool, you take other actions to get it to move. One of these is using a heat or applying heat to the casing. As you heat the casing up, it expands a little bit. You know, steel always moves with heat, doesn't it? And if it's an outer casing, it will expand. If it's inner, it will also expand as well. So it's Surefire 2+ gas system, a Rothenberger, that works really well. And now this is actually very hot. This will help me to remove the bearing like so. So after a lot of winding, the bearing has come out, and the tool is hot as well because heat always transfers. Get some rag to hold it. Yep, there is a tutorial along with the product review on my other channel, link below for this. And next what we have to do is check the bearing, make sure the new bearing is exactly the same, the external diameter, internal diameter, the width and the position of the ABS sensor ring, okay. So that does check out alright, and this seal here is actually the face or the exciter ring which stimulates the ABS sensor. Without it you will not get a reading, okay, so be careful of that. Iron filings stick to that so you can check it's magnetic, yeah. So if it's got an exciter ring there, it will be magnetic, okay. So next thing to do is just warm it up just a little bit, just gently, okay. It does get hot actually in service as the bearing works, it gets warm, but we don't have to go too excessive with it. This is why the Rothenberger is pretty good. It's a plumber's torch, isn't it? Yep, so the other bearing race which gets stuck on the hub, yeah, or the hub flange, needs to be cut, and sometimes unfortunately cutting it diagonally you can cut into the shaft as well, which you know if somebody's changed the wheel bearing before, because generally this is a usual practice. Unless you use a puller, which is really awkward to do and very expensive, you have to cut corners, and that's probably the easiest way of doing it. So let's move on and get this hub back in here, and the tool is set up to make sure it doesn't push the rear part of the bearing in once this is being installed. Very, very important. Like I say, if you're interested in this tool and you want to know how to do this properly, then that is on the link below. You can click through and watch me do a wheel bearing completely, okay? I know customers don't like to pay for a fitter's time. This took me probably about 2.5 hours in total, and a little bit longer because I was also using the camera and making sure I got the shots right for you, even though the videography isn't the best. Okay, so I put that back onto the McPherson strut there, and yeah, that does need knocking into place, and there is a locating tab. I use this ceramic spray, which is a corrosion inhibitor. Now, if this goes through a lot of water and water gets on the splines, it will seize it up, so I don't want that to happen because this will eventually have to come out again. I know it will, and I'm pretty sure that there'll be an ABS sensor fault soon because I haven't had one of those for a while. Anyway, yeah, basically back onto the bottom ball joint. Now, if you haven't checked your bottom ball joints and you are doing a job like this, then it may be worth changing it while you're in this position because it's a lot easier. Some are bolted in and some are fixed to the wishbone, so you have to check your vehicle to see what's needed. But don't damage, whatever you do, don't damage the shaft or the rubber there, because the rubber will then let moisture, water into the ball joint itself and it will seize up. Okay, so there we go. It has a slot in it and you can see where the pinch bolt goes through. That stops it from sliding out. So we're almost there. Just do everything back up again, put it back into place, torque up the drive shaft nut, and away we go. That's okay, that's pretty good. So there we go. Use the old battery gun. This is a quick trick. This gun actually goes up to something like 210 newton meters, so I have to be very careful when I'm tightening stuff up, and I do check it with a bar afterwards to make sure it's okay. So there you go, there's the pinch bolt. You need to check your vehicle to make sure you have the right size tools for the job. Okay, now this was 15mm one side and 17 the other for spanner and socket sizes, which it wasn't originally. It was 17 and 17, but it's been changed, yeah, because when people work on vehicles they change things. So away we go again. We'll fit the brake disc after cleaning. Just as a matter of caution, always make sure you have brake cleaner to clean up all the crap. And when you've put your disc on and you've located it correctly and put your retaining bolts back in, you only really need one. Yeah, make sure it's clean with brake cleaner, because greasy hands put grease all over the working surfaces. If your brake discs need changing at that time, then you've assessed it already and you can just go ahead and do it. So you can see I use this anti-corrosion stuff quite a lot actually. Ceramic spray is dry, it's dry. After then it's using the torque wrench or should I say the feel on doing critical bolts up, yeah, and then putting everything back together. Now the crux comes when you have the vehicle on lifts or ramps or axle stands. You cannot really do wheel nuts up or do drive shaft nuts up. So what you do is put it on the flat. Now remember, I've drained the gearbox oil here, and you need to fill up the gearbox oil on the flat, on level ground. But also this gives opportunity to tighten up the nut, and you see this long bar here. It's nice, isn't it? That's a 3/4 drive breaker bar, and that costs somewhere in the region about £25 from Blue Spot Tools. I'll leave a link below for you to go if you're interested in getting one that size, but you do need an adapter. Now the chisel here I ground down for the stake nut, which is the final part that you need to do for the nut that's on the drive shaft, because this is really, really tight as well. There is a chance it can come undone, so you need all the locking devices, if they're provided, which they are here. You need to stake them over, okay? They are sacrificial nuts. Once you've removed it, you don't put it back in. Okay, so just a finishing touch for me. I've cleaned all the oil off this, and I'm painting it with some spare grey paint, which I painted the wheels. If you haven't noticed, yes, I've painted my wheels grey. So here we go. We're going to put not all of this tube in, but this is yeah, molly slip. My dad swears by this. They've been using it for years. It makes transmissions last a lot longer because it's chrome molybdendium, chrome molybdendium sulfate, yeah. which is good for gear contact. Okay, so fill level on a gearbox, you pump it up and then you let it find its own level. This is why you need to put it on level ground. And here's the old oil and some of the stuff that's left over. This is aerated because I used an air pump to pump the oil into the gearbox, as you can see here. And yes, I do have to pay for this. It's all monitored. Yep, so there we go. This will require a road test, obviously, to check for leaks, check for vibrations or anything like that. But of course you need to torque up the wheels always, guys. Vitally important. However small the vehicle, always use a torque wrench on the wheel nuts. So once that's done, now this is the crux of the matter. Any work you do, especially being a prepper, alright, well, any mechanic, my reputation and my livelihood depends on my toolbox being organised, so I don't lose tools, therefore lose time. Okay, so I listen to a little bit of Bob Marley while I'm putting the tools back, and while I'm cleaning them, I'm checking for the condition of them and making sure that I have everything. It's like aircraft technicians. They don't let anything go out of a hangar until all the tools have been signed back in, and this is what you need to do. You need to do that wherever you work, whether roadside or in your garage. Yeah. So I know it could be being a little bit anal, but it's something that you know straight away where your tools are. You can go to them. If you've lost anything, you can go and find it, because sometimes lost tools can cause vehicle damage. Yep, so it's a retorque after half an hour on the wheel nuts, and technically this is what you need to do. Go for a road test and check for leaks and everything else. So that is it, guys. That was my Saturday morning done and finished, and I've shared it with you. How about that?